to welcome you to this very special program. The think tank was conceived by our Social Justice Institute as a space for envisioning what liberation looks like for marginalized communities. But we know that we cannot do this until we have healed. And we cannot heal until we have acknowledged our history. So we need talks like this one. We need to learn and listen. We need to reignite passions for social justice. And we need to spread that passion throughout our communities. The poets, scholars, and thought leaders that you will be hearing from over the next few days will help us do just that. I'm especially pleased that today's keynote speaker, Derecka Purnell, has joined us in this mission. Her book, Becoming Abolitionists, Police, Protests, and the Pursuit of Freedom, has been described as a blueprint towards a just and livable future. I know that we have a lot to learn from her, and I'm absolutely thrilled that she is joining us today. Now, you are all here because the topic of social justice is of tremendous importance right now, and its relevance has been amplified significantly through issues facing our country today. We at Case Western Reserve University are committed to confronting these challenges head on through our university's vision, which we call our North Star. In it, we recommit ourselves as a high-impact research institution that seeks to strengthen our community by leveraging the intersections of humanity, science, and technology with a strong sense of justice and fairness. And we strive to promote an inclusive community within our borders and beyond. And there's no better home to help us realize our vision for a just and thriving world than our own Social Justice Institute. For more than a decade, the Institute has served to engage with the local community, providing the means to educate the next generation of leaders, and to conduct research that promotes and affects positive policy change in Cleveland and beyond. The Institute is superbly positioned to lead our university in furthering our role as a national leader in social justice. But we couldn't do it without our leaders. I am forever grateful for the work of the Institute's founding director, Dr. Rhonda Williams, and for our current co-directors, Aisha Bell Hardaway and Mark Chubb, both of whom you will be hearing from later. Mark and Aisha, I want to thank you for being such inspirational leaders. I know you will lead us down a path of greater justice in our community and beyond. Now, before I leave you, I want to say a few words about the theme of this event. We've called it a balm for what ails us: respect, renew, reimagine. It's a fitting title for many reasons. In today's world, everyone needs healing. This is an age where respect for one another seems lost. So now we have to renew what's human in ourselves. Our forefathers were called to imagine a new America together. But that imagination was constrained by the blinders of their times. But this is an age of reimagination. We must now come together to reimagine what a better America means. And we must do that work to make real, meaningful change. I'm delighted that you've all joined us in this cause, and I look forward to hearing the outcome of this event. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. And thank you, Provost Vincent, and for your commitment to the Social Justice Institute being the convener of all things social justice at our university. Tonight, we begin our think tank with gratitude for the Earth, as Case Western Reserve University and all of us depend on the Earth's life-sustaining systems. In recognizing the land upon which we reside, we express our gratitude and appreciation to those who lived and worked here before us, those whose stewardship and resilient spirit makes our residence possible on the ancestral lands of the Delaware, Lenape, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Shawnee, Wyandot, Miami, Ottawa, Potawatomi, and other Great Lakes tribes, the Chippewa, Kickapoo, Wea, Pinkeshaw, and Kaskaskia. This land of the Northwest Territory was ceded under force from U.S. military by 1,100 chiefs and warriors signing the 1795 Treaty of Greenville. Subsequently, the treaty was not honored by the United States of America. Today, tens of thousands of indigenous people live in Northeast Ohio, our neighbors, friends, co-workers, and have much to share to those who are open to learn.
We also acknowledge that many of Cleveland's residents did not migrate to this country, but were the mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters of African communities treated as property instead of humans by those seeking to profit in the imperial and capitalist economy of transatlantic colonialism. We acknowledge the power and resilience of African American communities who continue to face racial oppression and systemic violence. Other communities of color, Asian and Asian Americans, have also persisted in the midst of ongoing violence and oppression of white supremacy. The life and power of these people are essential to the heart of Greater Cleveland and global vitality, and we recognize them tonight.
Let us also acknowledge and work through the past, which gives us, everyone, a clearer future, born of legitimate rage, making right, grief, and healing. Working at quality relationships with each other and with our ecological home are essential steps we must take for achieving healing and wholeness. May this land acknowledgement be both an educational moment and a call to action. Join the Native Americans and Native communities in solidarity through education and participation in the Land Back movement. You can also help Native American communities by providing resources to organizations like the Lake Erie Native American Council. They accept donations and volunteers of all kinds.
Where are we? Oh, right. So this weekend, we're really excited. First of all, it's a Thursday evening. This room is pretty full. And we are grateful that you decided to spend some time with us tonight. You're in for a treat of that, I am sure. I am personally really excited about this event. We've spent a lot of time brainstorming, thinking about what would be meaningful to share, not just with the campus community, but with the broader Cleveland community. Those of you who know me know that SJI is near and dear to my heart because of the connection to community, because it creates the space for an academic to be in conversation with the sage leaders, thought leaders of our area, and not just siloed inside of this campus, inside of the walls of this campus. And so I'm really, really gratified by the fact that there are so many community members here. Tonight is the first of 3 sessions, if you will. Tomorrow we have a conversation about democracy. Every conversation that we're going to have is about liberation, but the specific subject of tomorrow's conversation is around democracy, what it means. We have folks who are on the ground doing the work to ensure that people's votes are counted and cast, and that those who don't have currently the ability to vote receive that right, or are able to exercise that right. We also have a spoken word by Roger Bell Freeman of 12 Literary Arts, who's going to join and open the night. there is no imagination. I'm really, really struck by something that I read recently in Robin D.G. Kelly's Freedom Dreams. It's like the 20th anniversary of Freedom Dreams. If you haven't read it, please pick it up. But he talks about how the arts is essential to reimagining liberation. And so that is why through all of our events, we have some aspects of the arts woven through. And so tomorrow night we'll have Raja Bell Freeman along with the others. On Saturday, we have a full lineup of, we'll start with Healing Through the Arts with Tandi Wiley, a panel discussion on community safety and liberation, something that I know is on the minds of so many in our community. And then a theater performance by Ananias Dixon. If you have done anything on the theater scene in Cleveland, you should know Ananias. If you don't, you should come so that you get to see his craft. He is phenomenal. And his piece, the piece that he's performing by Lisa Langford about mass incarceration. If you've registered, you know that there's a lunch provided on Saturday. And then we'll have conversations about community health, music by A New Vibe, and then we'll close out our panel conversations about education, which I'm really, really excited. You all, it may have been scrolling at some point, but the artwork, Samantha Coco, our administrative coordinator, has designed all of the visual marketing for this event. It's beautiful. If you get the chance to look at it, please do. But more importantly, come to the events. We will close on Saturday with some healing meditation. Again, we've been through a lot. We've been through a lot individually. We've been through a lot collectively. We've been through a lot as a city over the last 2 years and beyond. And we really felt like, I'll speak for me, I really felt like it was very important for us to have a moment of healing with our time together. And so we will do some of that along the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to add a couple comments, our goal for this think tank is to embrace the challenge and explore really what liberation looks like for communities historically and currently marginalized by oppressive systems. We know that envisioning liberation requires healing, which Aisha just talked about. And in order to heal, we must acknowledge our history and speak truth to power, which we will do throughout the next 3 days. And our ambition is to foster conversations and engage in deep listening and learning, and reignite the passion for social justice across the Cleveland community. And we're so happy that we have such a great representation and participation from our Cleveland community, not just the university. So, as you said, Aisha, we know that the work is hard and we've been through a lot, and we're tired, and some of us are sick and tired. With the onslaught of so many justice issues that require urgent attention. We're angry that all too often, on many different fronts, we're going in the wrong direction as a country, and retrenchment and white nationalism is growing. So we've included these exciting opportunities over the next 3 days for you to take in theater, music, spoken word, visual arts, meditation. And so we're excited and grateful for the artists who have given their gifts to us. And we express our gratitude for you and the time you're taking to be here. And we invite you to do what you need to do to receive the balm for what ails you as you pursue liberation and continue on your path of becoming. So thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, I'm going to ask our guest of honor, our keynote, and the wonderful person that she's going to be in conversation with to join us on the stage, if you don't mind, as I read your introductions. Kamaria Valentine. Kamaria is a sophomore from Greenville, South Carolina, who is majoring in psychology and cognitive sciences here at Case Western Reserve University. They are the co-founder of the Western Reserve Abolitionist Project and the vice chair of the Student Advancement on Black Student Union's Executive Board. Kamaria describes themselves their self. Sorry, I'm getting this together. Everybody makes mistakes. I am one of you all, which is of the human race. Kamaria describes themselves as a Black liberationist and abolitionist. Most of their work as an activist, is it okay? Yeah, both. But most of her work as an activist in the community is centered around abolishing the prison industrial complex, providing resources to the incarcerated while also advocating on their behalf, and educating people about abolition. Kamaria is also a social justice scholar, which we've been doing some dynamic work this semester, and I'm so grateful to be in conversation and in fellowship with them. And so we're thrilled to have Kamaria with us here tonight. Derecka Purnell is a human rights lawyer, researcher, and author of Becoming Abolitionist, Police Protests, and the Pursuit of Freedom. Her work she works to end police and prison violence by providing legal assistance, research, and training in community-based organizations through an abolitionist framework. As a Skadden Fellow, she helped to build the Justice Project at Advancement Project's national office, which focused on consent decrees, police and prosecutor accountability, and jail closures. In the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, Ms. Purnell co-created the COVID-19 Policing Project at the Community Resources Hub for Safety Accountability. The project tracks police arrests, harassment, citations, and other enforcement through public health orders related to the pandemic. Derecka Purnell received her JD from Harvard Law School, her BA from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and studied public policy and economics at the University of California, Berkeley, as a public policy and international affairs law fellow. Her writing has been published widely, including the Oxford Handbook of Race and the Law in the United States, which is forthcoming, the Harvard Journal of African American Policy, the New York Times, the Atlantic, the New York Magazine, Boston Review, Teen Vogue, and Harper's Bazaar. Ms. Purnell has lectured, studied, and strategized around social movements across the United States, the Netherlands, Belgium, South Africa, the United Kingdom, and Australia. She is currently a columnist at The Guardian and a scholar in residence at Columbia Law. And I'm here to tell you all she is down to earth. I am so honored to have gotten to know her over the last few years and to have the opportunity to welcome her here to Case Western Reserve University. I truly believe that it is important for us to continue to have conversations around how we make progress in our community and what we as community members can do to achieve our ends and our desires. And so I'm grateful. It's a sacrifice for all of us to be here tonight, but it's particularly a sacrifice for Derecka to be away from her family and her loved ones. She has 2 small children, and one of them had a birthday yesterday, and she's still here anyway. So y'all be sure to show her some love. We will do Q&A. We will do Q&A after Kamaria and Derecka have their conversation. We have 2 microphones set up in the room. I'm going to just designate them. This side, if we could, will be for community members. This side will be for people affiliated with the university. That is not as a method of dividing and segregating. Instead, the goal is to make sure that we have parity so that we could go from one mic to the other. I want voices from both community and from the campus to be engaged. And so that was the way, maybe a little bit clunky, but that was the way that we decided that we would try to make sure that everyone could be heard and that they could have an opportunity to ask questions of our keynote. We thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Okay. I just want to make sure you can hear me. I'm going to start with my first question. In your book, Becoming Abolitionist, you write about multiple experiences that brought you to abolitionist work. Out of all of those experiences, what did you learn or endure that you believe is essential for people to experience in order to do this work?
Okay, hi everyone. How y'all doing? Wonderful. Okay. That's nice. I want to be wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. This is my first time in Cleveland. So I won't talk about the Cavs because they're good and exciting. Yeah, so this is nice. Cleveland is so pretty. Okay, who was it? Okay, all right. Thank you so much for being in conversation with me. I'm almost twice your age, which is blowing my mind because when we met earlier, I was just so blown away by your intelligence, by your curiosity, by your brilliance. And I was like, wow, when I was a sophomore in college, I was not asking these types of questions of the world. So thank you so much for choosing to spend your time to do this with me. And introducing me to your cool friends from RAP, the Western Reserve Abolitionist Project, whose acronym is RAP. And I told them that they should also rap.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Because they could be like abolitionist rappers. It was so easy, and they shot it down. So I'll take that to the next university. Your question is so important. So you're asking, what was it that I learned on that journey? So yeah, I unfortunately describe what I write about in this book as a journey because it's the easiest way for me to tell people that I was in one place and ended up in another place. But our journeys are not linear, right? You don't start one way and just end up another way in life. You go the wrong way, you turn in circles, you got to put it in Google Maps, you got to find it, you know? So there's all different things that make us possible. And in writing the book, one thing that I hope to at least express it and name is that when we're born, we aren't born with ideas about police and about prisons and about safety and about race and about gender identity, right? We aren't born holding these ideas. We learn them, right? Where do we learn them? Where do we learn about police?
For me, especially growing up in the South, I think that a lot of it was implemented into our education. It was like
Paw Patrol.
Yeah, it was the focal point. Heavy on Paw Patrol.
Just saying, I got 2 kids. Paw Patrol. So media. So at school, in my school, we had a books and badges programs where cops would come into our classrooms in 5th grade and show us their guns and show us some books. And we were like, oh, this is weird and cool, I guess. Right. And so institutions create us. And so by the time we become adults and we have understandings of police, many of us have different kinds of encounters with them. And so when I was growing up, you know, my mom had a friend who was a cop, right? And he seemed nice. So he was at least nice to us and nice to my mom. But I'm sure he wasn't so nice to people who he encountered with, who he put in jail. And I also know that when my mom lost custody of us for being poor, and they put us in foster care, it was a police officer who accompanied the social worker to separate our family. And so these different interactions with police, I wanted to show that, yeah, sometimes they can seem normal, right? There's a post officer, there's a teacher, here's a cop, and we just have different kinds of them. But it wasn't until I started reading and learned about different kinds of activism who really challenged me to think about police and prisons as systems that manage inequality, right? What kinds of people do police encounter? Why do they encounter those people in the way that they do? And so what I tried to show is my personal development, understanding the history of police, which I didn't really know until Michael Brown was killed by Darren Wilson in Ferguson right before I started law school. I was like, oh yeah, I know police kill people, but I didn't know they killed 3 people a day. Like I didn't know that. And most people didn't know that because police were not required to keep track of how many people they killed. So that statistic didn't even become popular until around 2015 and 16 when the Washington Post and the Guardian started keeping track of police killings through media reports and police reports, right? So what I tried to show is that, oh, here are the ideas that I had about police. Here's the history that I learned. Here's what I learned about reform. Here's where I was wrong, even about ideas that I popularized and I was committed to, using in order to change police. And this is now, since being a lawyer, sort of my experiences. And then it tracks that journey or those sets of questions for different kinds of people in different kind of organizations. So people who are formerly incarcerated, right? Who were like, well, the prison I went to was bad, but I'm not ready to burn down all jails, right? How did that person get from that point to saying, well, we actually probably should burn down all jails? Or the generation of people who were organizing to get George Zimmerman arrested in 2012 for murdering Trayvon Martin. How did that generation of people become the main organizers when people were saying defund the police? Like, what happened in that 10-year period? So the book sort of tracks that for me, and it tracks that for that generation, for many people in that generation, and the evolution of our ideas that come out of a much broader, Black radical feminist tradition that called for police and prison abolition decades before Twitter, decades before George Floyd was killed. So I tried to make a contribution and offering through the text that does that.
I think that a lot of the times that people look at the statistics and they negate the lives behind those statistics. I think it's very often that when we look at these stories or just the numbers, we don't know the stories behind them. So, and we talked about this as in the social justice scholar group, like what impact do stories hold? So your story personally, especially in your interactions with police officers and the brutality that they imposed into you and also your family, and then also seeing them in another light, I think it perpetuates the idea that this is an issue that's very gray. Because we have been indoctrinated into a society that thinks that punishment is the best way to resolve conflict. But we know now that's not the answer, because this is what keeps happening. We keep seeing people murdered for doing minor mess ups. So I think that the question that I wanted to ask was, what specifically was the breaking point? Like, what turned your perception from thinking that cops can be good and bad and that they're essential to a society to we have to find something else?
Wow, there is so many. I don't know if there was one in particular, one that helps me explain part of what you just said. What's the story behind what happens? When I talk to people and I write about what happened to George Floyd, and George Floyd, when he was murdered, it became a global rallying cry against police violence. In a way, 26 million people alone in the United States protested, but there were protests all over literally all over the world. I was just in Portugal, and they're, written in Portuguese on walls near my hotel was like, ACAB and, George Floyd should be alive, right? So I was like, wow, it's wild, but George Floyd had been living in Texas and had went to Minnesota to find work. So this is someone who's a victim of capitalism, victim of economic suffering, right? And it's in Minnesota, working at one point, worked at a bouncer at a club where Derek Chauvin, the person killed him, also worked, right? And it's in a neighborhood where there had been increased usage of counterfeit money. And so he was initially, the store clerk called the police on him, or was told to call the police on him over the alleged use of a counterfeit $20 bill, right? And so why are people using counterfeit $20 bills? Like, that is the crisis. Like, that's the problem. And so when all of our energy gets focused on, we need to convict this cop because of what he did, we miss that, whoa, why is a community surviving on buying cigarettes with counterfeit $20 bills? Like, that is the source of the police encounter. So then the police gets called, and, he puts his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes, 9 minutes. And in that time, I'm thinking about clients who I represented who didn't die, who just went to jail and were just prosecuted, right? They didn't die. And there's no movement. Like, there's just no movement. So had George Floyd lived, he could have been near death, just like so many people who police stop all the time, and there would have been no protests. And so the spectacular violence of what happened to George Floyd becomes the breaking point for lots of people, because you're not supposed to die over $20, but not necessarily, you're not supposed to be using counterfeit $20 bills to survive. Exactly. Like, that is like, how do we get to that? Because that's what an abolitionist framework, that's how we use that to approach the problem. We don't need a nicer Derek Chauvin. We don't need a blacker one, a gayer one who's a woman. We need one with body count. We need George Floyd and people like him to not survive on counterfeit $20 bills. That's the just society that we're fighting for. Yeah, so it's heartbreaking. And when you look at police arrest data, like if you guys don't know about the Prison Policy Initiative, I highly recommend them as an incredible resource. Because when you look at arrest data, you see that there are about 10 million arrests every year. 10 million arrests, right? And the people who are arrested more than one time, guess what their annual incomes are? $10,000 or less. $10,000 or less. And so when we say we need, police to be smart on crime, no, that's not a police problem. That's an inequality and capitalism problem, right? Why? Again, what's the nature of the interaction? If police are shifting people who are unhoused from one subway station to a different part of the city, having more diverse cops is not going to fix that.
Exactly.
You're just going to have some black cops moving people around. And what's so frustrating is that when that gets touted as progress, like look at all the training we've gone to move people who are poor from one place to another. That's not the headline though. It's like we're more diverse. we have more tools. We got this grant. We're doing community policing. I just want community, not the policing. Let's just figure out the community part, right? Like let's get that down. And so I find that these moments of spectacular violence are opportunities for us, for people who are engaged in social movements, to like really turn the question back on society. Well, do you want better cops or do you want less violence? And they require two different responses from us.
I think that a lot of the times people forget that abolition is a very intersectional framework. And then in, of course, that case, the history of Black women in U.S., shout out to Dr. Volt, but she's a phenomenal professor, and she's teaching us that the violence that Black women face in the prison industrial complex and through just interactions with cops, it's not talked about, it's not referenced a lot. And I think that you talking about how capitalism was the driving force in that situation for George Floyd's brutality and his murder, that I often think that what happens to the people whose stories are not told? What happens to those people who have to live with that violence, keep it in a silence because of the systems that we live in, because of those institutional oppression? So I'm thinking about how capitalism has affected my life, and when as somebody who grew up in a single parent household and lower income, and when George Floyd happened, that's what kind of that was the clicking moment, I think, for me and me pursuing Black liberationist work and prison abolitionist work. But there were so many moments that could have been clicking moments. When my mom couldn't get food for us on food stamps. Yeah. When my mom was struggling to be able to have us go on school trips. When my mom was just sitting there crying her eyes out because she can't find somebody to build community with and help raise her children. And those are the moments that could have clicked for me. And outside of my family and just the brutality I faced in school, but they weren't enough. I feel like it's interesting to think of, and I wanted to ask you this, what does it take for people to think this has to stop? This is something that is too much for us to handle. And because it was cishet Black men that were the face of that brutality and people were outraged. But what about Sandra Bland? What about Breonna Taylor? She was the first, the real first woman for people to sit there and say this crime was brutal and for them to be outraged about it. But what about the hundreds of Black women who were raped, who were degraded, who were beat, who were murdered by cops? What about them?
Yes. Wow. So much there. So I think, I don't know, I didn't do this earlier. So when I say abolition, or I'm an abolitionist, what I'm saying is that I'm committed politically and through my work and eradicating capitalist, carceral, community-based violence, colonial violence, at the same time, over time, and then working to build something in its place. That is what I mean when I say I'm an abolitionist, right? It doesn't mean that, the million cops that exist are gonna disappear overnight, or the 18,000 law enforcement agencies that we have are going to disappear, or the 2,300 jails and prisons are going to close instantly, right? Well, I'm saying when I'm an abolitionist, I'm coming from a tradition of people who are asking, what can we do in our lifetimes to make sure we're committed to using abolition as a framework to shrink the violence that we have, to build the just society that we want. So I just want to be clear, because I don't want it to be like an hour in and then it's Q&A and someone's like, so wait, what's abolition? I'm like, oh yeah, that's my bad. So let me say up front what I mean when I say that. Second, to your point about, Black women experience certain kinds of violence, and this often becomes a critique, or I don't know if it's a real critique, but it's a critique that people have about abolition. I've heard from Black women, especially I've heard from Black mayors, and say, well, if we abolish the police, who's going to keep Black people safe? The ghettos are going to go wild. Who are Black women going to call? And when you look at, again, police data, and you see that, oh yeah, Black women call police more than white women. And it's not because Black women trust police more than white women. It's because when Black women are in crises, they have less resources to figure out how to go to a safer situation. They have less opportunity for childcare. They get paid less at work, right? They're more vulnerable to violence from their neighbors, strangers, lovers, children, and police. And so what cities often do is package all of that into a 911 number instead of the actual resources that Black women need to be safe. And so I have to say, well, abolition is about lots of different answers to harm that Black women deserve, and not just saying it simply can be solved by calling the police, right? Exactly. That is what I'm committed to. So I wanted to say that because it's very, very, very important to me to name that. And then to your specific point around Black women who experience harm from police violence, I write about this a little bit, I think in chapter 7. And I noticed that there was this chapter 7? I haven't read the book in a long time. I think it's chapter 7. I noticed that there was this critique from Black women, and I experienced this mostly online, of everyone cares about Black men dying. What about these Black women who get killed? And then I started reading into the stories, and I started paying attention to, well, why is this the case? Well, Black men often get killed in public settings where there's more of a spectacle. Exactly. Black women often get killed in their homes. And that's very important. Breonna Taylor, Ayanna Stanley Jones, Sandra Bland gets killed on the side of a road, and we get a bit of her body. No, she doesn't. She gets pulled over. Her death doesn't happen until behind closed doors. So the public spectacle, Michael Brown gets shot in Ferguson, Missouri, in an apartment complex in August while school is out. It's summertime. His body is left on the ground for 4.5 hours. And so it's interesting. Well, Black women are getting killed during raids. Black men are being killed through pursuits, in public settings. Like, I think that's a major contributing factor and a tragic accident of history. I think patriarchy is absolutely a part of it, but I think that we also have to name the specific sources of violence so we can also come up with specific sources of solutions. Because what's going to stop people from, like, Michael Brown getting killed is not going to be the same from what stops Breonna Taylor from getting killed, right? So I think that we have to name that. Yeah, so I know you said Breonna Taylor was the first, and again, the mainstream energy that came out of that movement was arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor, and like, how do we ban no-knock warrants, right? If we want to save Black women, cops are not going to be deterred from doing more no-knock warrants. They're just going to do it differently. Maybe we'll have different types of collateral damage, but more people are going to continue to die as long as that tactic exists. And so we have to figure out, well, how do we not mystify the system by calling like 4 people who did this evil? Because evilness doesn't give us the resources to undermine the power. Right? How do we undermine the power that they get to do something like this? And so that's sort of what I try to ask. And I always uplift people like Beth Ritchie, Andrea Ritchie. Both of them have books, and they've done work for years that talk about specific instances of violence from police against Black women. Especially Beth Ritchie. Beth Ritchie had a whole collective, Insight. In 1998, Insight was engaging with debates with Critical Resistance, one of the early at prison abolitionist groups about, well, if we abolish police and prisons, how's it going to impact women in the domestic violence space? And so this has been an ongoing debate inside of abolitionist circles for almost 30 years, right? So when people say, oh, it's going to, make Black women unsafe, it's like, well, that's old. We're so past that part of the argument. Like, why not ask instead, where are people talking about this? What have people said about this problem instead of we can't do it because it won't XYZ, instead of how do we approach that with more curiosity instead of condemnation? So yeah, I think that our goal hopefully is to have less Breonna Taylors, not more coverage of people like Breonna Taylor's, because I don't think the coverage necessarily translates to less violence.
Exactly.
We got a lot of coverage around Breonna Taylor. It didn't stop Ma'Khia Bryant from getting killed. It didn't. And then the last thing I'll say about this, and this is the chapter 7 part, is that the stories that I tell of the 3 Black women who were killed in their homes in chapter 7, Eleanor Bumpurs, Deborah Danner, and Corinne Gaines, also died defending themselves against police. Right, I do think that is a specific patriarchal, in terms of the response issue, because people are less likely to defend people who defend themselves against the police. And so that's why I had to, for a long time, stop saying unarmed. This person's an unarmed person. We live in a country where there are more guns than people. The chances of someone being armed are very high. So police can't have both. You can't have, well, they might be armed. Everyone might be armed and dangerous, unfortunately. Like it's like that's the society that we live in, right? And so it's like, well, just because someone's armed doesn't mean that they're dangerous, right? Just because someone's armed, they also have a right to defend themselves, including a right to defend themselves against police. But you see in the case of these 3 women, Deborah Danner, had a baseball bat and was, killed in her home in New York. Eleanor Bumpurs was holding a butter knife and afraid of being evicted from her home because she was complaining of repairs. And then she was killed by police. And then you have Corinne Gaines, who shouldn't have been served a warrant. Again, police kicked down her door. She's live streaming to show like this is what's happening. Police contact Facebook. Facebook cuts off her live stream of saying like, hey, y'all, this is what's happening to me. I'm protecting myself. And what happened? Shoot through the door, kill her, shoot her toddler, right? Shoot her baby. Her baby survives. Her family sues the police, sues the city of Baltimore. The jury rewards like a $30 million settlement. The judge is like, no, that's way too much money. And then I had to appeal to get the money, right? And so this is the condition. In the book, I try to say that, well, why was Corinne Gaines so defensive against police? As if she needed a reason. And then I started going through her Instagram for like years and years back, and I'm watching her being pulled over by cops. Her kids are scared in the back seat, and the police are saying, you have nothing to be afraid of. And Corinne Gaines is like, what? There are videos right now that my kids see of y'all killing Black people. And the police tell her in front of her children, that's a lie. That's not real. And the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, telling her that's not real. That's not right. Takes Corinne Gaines, arrests her, puts her in prison, puts her in jail because of her attacks. She ends up miscarrying, loses a child. So you want to talk about a reproductive justice issue? She miscarries while she's in jail. And so this is someone who is threatening, she's facing loss for custody for her children. She miscarries while she's in jail. The police are telling her children have nothing to be afraid of, that their mother is lying to them about the violence that's happening in the world. And then when they come to bring a warrant to her house for someone who doesn't even live there, and she defends herself, she gets killed. She gets killed. And then what's the mainstream conversation? Well, she had a gun. She was armed. So it's not right and it's unfair. And so if we want to think about how to protect Black women from police violence, we have to think about, well, what are the conditions that bring them together? And then chapter 6, I talk about sexual violence. A lot of times after police brutality, the second most reported complaint against police is sexual misconduct. Second most. Police brutality, and then sexual misconduct. And guess who reports that? Guess who's vulnerable to that? Women who are exploited by police, sex workers who are exploited by police. You know, Daniel Holtzclaw in Oklahoma just, what was that, 4 years ago? 5 years ago? I'm on pandemic time, so I can't even remember. It's 5 years ago.
The one that got charged with a bunch of
yes.
It was like 2018, I think.
And again, when I say inequality matters, he got away with that so long because the people who he was primarily targeting were low income, hyper exploited sex workers. Mm-hmm. And you know who reported him? Someone from a Black woman who was middle class, and he was like, "Oh, I didn't know you lived in that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. You were driving through this neighborhood and I pulled you over. You actually live in a different neighborhood." And she told her daughter what happened. They went and filed a police complaint. But all those other people, all those other sex workers, all those people he exploited, when they complained, was there the same level of response? No. So when I say that inequality and capitalism drives these police encounters, I mean that.
I think that because you were talking about those notions that like not describing people who face brutality as unarmed, and not describing or not perceiving these people as someone who are like they can't defend themselves in the face of police because police are supposed to protect us. But these are notions that are associated with what we are taught. Mm-hmm. We're indoctrinated to think these things. So can you describe your process in which you began de-indoctrinating these notions? To think differently about these people, like, because I used to call incarcerated people prisoners, but that's not the language that should be used to describe them because they're people first.
Yeah, I think, well, this is what's complicated. I kind of disagree with that.
Oh, okay.
I kind of disagree with that. I'm a little bit torn with some of the people first language. And I've been pushed a lot by people who are in the disability justice movement around this and around political prisoners. And when I listen to Mumia, you know, talk about his experiences being incarcerated and why he calls himself a prisoner, it's like, it's important to remember that because sometimes the people first language, it obscures the violence of what actually has happened.
Okay, yeah.
Like the United States kidnaps people and holds them prisoners. Like that's a real thing. And I don't think that the United States has the power to decide who's human or not. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think calling someone a prisoner takes away their humanity. It names the system that they're unfortunately captured in. Mm-hmm. And I know that there are debates about that. So that's why I didn't say, I think you're wrong. And I say, I actually disagree. When I think that someone's undocumented, it's like, yeah, I don't think there's a person who's undocumented. People are undocumented because of our very racist, xenophobic border that we have set up in this country. And that's true. And so I think it just really depends on, you know, the political movements that you're a part of and then who you're struggling with around these ideas.
So you think that's influenced by, because as somebody who's a Black liberationist, I think I look at things very differently than somebody who isn't. As somebody who's an abolitionist, I look at things very differently. Like the notion of, like get that bag, stuff like that.
You said get that bag?
Yeah, get that bag, yeah. Derecka, girl.
Y'all know get that bag? I don't know that bag. What's get that bag?
It's like getting money. You gotta go get
generally
that bag.
Get that bag.
Yeah, go get that bag.
I thought you were talking like a specific thing that happened. I was like, no. We've been saying that before you were born. I was get that bag.
I was about to say, listen. But when I like,
but wait, how does it relate to prisoners?
Oh no, I'm like, wait,
I'm trying to think prisoners getting the bag.
No, I'm talking about it as like a notion that's been like instilled into us.
Yes,
like to get money.
Yes,
and so like.
Sorry,
you made me lose my train of thought. Oh,
no. Okay, so get that bag has been instilled in you, and you're saying that.
I'm saying, but now as I'm a Black liberation and abolitionist, I look at that very differently than like that.
It's like redistribute that bag.
Yeah, yes. Get that money so you give it back to your community.
Yes.
Not get that money so I can put it in my pocket, hoard it. You know, and so like when I think that when we use that language, like for you using prisoners, it's completely different than a cishet white man who is not involved in anything that is related to abolitionism, Black liberation, anything that is anti his being, his positioning. When he uses that language, it's harmful to me because you're describing people in my family as nothing more than an object within the system. You don't even see us as human. But when we use that language, when like especially you and the way you describe it, then yeah, I know you see them as human.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I don't where did it even start? So I love this. I found this quote. I remember I was in college when I read it. It was like, oh my gosh, yes, Stokely. So Stokely Carmichael, he has this incredible quote. I may not get it right verbatim because I haven't thought about it in a long time. He says, now then, in order to understand white supremacy, we must dismiss the fallacious notion that white people are able to give anyone their freedom. Right? And I think about that with humanization. I personally don't like humanization language. And this is in chapter 7. I don't like it. And I'm saying I don't like it because I don't think it's important, but I think it's just the wrong energy. People spend a lot of time getting people to see someone as human, as if seeing someone as human is enough to stop violence.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I don't think that's true. I think that, and this is, violent what I'm about to say, but I think when people were being sexually assaulted on plantations, it wasn't because they were tables. It's because they were human. And so I don't think getting people to see someone as human is unfortunately what ends up happening, especially in the policing context. And I used to hear this a lot, man. If cops just saw these Black kids as human, then they just need to play basketball with them. No, seriously, this is how whole programs get funded. Police athletically, they just need to see them as human. And I'm just like, oh yeah, they do see them as human because they use those leaks to get intel and to surveil them, right? And then the money get put into getting cops and people to see other people as human, as if whether I'm human or not, whether a cop has a power to decide that. And so that is where I sort of get caught up in the humanization, dehumanization language. No one has the power to take my humanity away. Not a person, not a race, not an institution. Like no one has that power, and I don't give that power freely. I can't be dehumanized by someone. They dehumanize themselves, and what it takes to oppress someone takes numbing. It takes violence to get someone's body against someone's soul, right? Like what they put themselves through to hurt other people, I think that may be dehumanizing to them, but I don't subscribe to humanization and dehumanization as that language. So I don't think that it's getting people to see each other as human is why. I think it's precisely because someone's human that they're able to exploit them, and why humans are uniquely exploited in the way that they are. And so I really, Walter Johnson's this historian, who I love. He is at Harvard right now, but he wrote this book about St. Louis called The Broken Heart of America. And he writes about slavery in this way. He says, look, they knew exactly what they were doing. Exactly. And to say that they dehumanized them was to give power to the people who enslaved them. Why do slavers get to decide who's human or not? Why would we give them that power? But even if we go before Walter Johnson and we look at Frederick Douglass is like, okay, wait. Y'all say I'm a slave and I'm not human. But for Black people in the state of Virginia, there are, 100 crimes for which someone can be lynched. But if you're a white man, there's only 3. So they don't think we're human, but they expect us to know all of these extra laws to save our lives. How do you reconcile that? Right? So when I look at people in my broader radical tradition, it's like, why are they rejecting human? Why is Sojourner Truth rejecting the idea of what it means to be a certain kind of human that's a woman? Why are they pushing back on these ideas? I think part of it is because they know that they just don't have power over me like that. And so that is sort of, I don't even know the original question no more, but I'm really enjoying this conversation. I think it's important. I think it's something we should continue to grapple with in our movement. And the last thing I'll say, this is in chapter 7, disability justice movement. The reason they push back on people's first language, like people with disabilities, because it locates a disability inside of someone's body. Right? Yeah. Instead of saying, well, no. We're disabled by an ableist society. Exactly. Like society is disabling, right? That's why I'm exploited the way that I am. That's why I can't be in this room the way that it is. I am a disabled person. And what makes me disabled is not what I can or cannot do with my body or my mind or my emotions. It's exactly because of how society is arranged. And so it puts the onus again on looking at power arrangements, right? Instead of just trying to get the world to change, people people first, people first, people first. Well, if you aren't willing to upend how people experience this world altogether, then using a language doesn't lead us towards that future. But I think this is like a really important debate that people should continue to have, because it just shows up differently depending on where's your political home.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you said reminded me of like Afro pessimist theory.
Oh no.
No, hear me out.
These Afro pessimists, y'all run. When someone says Afro pessimism, run.
Okay. I respect what this author says. Afro pessimism does make me hesitate. I'm like, okay, hold on. But this author, I can't remember his name, but he's the author of this book, like Red, White, and Black. And he's talking about like relations between white people, black people, indigenous people. And he describes as like the notion that you said, like humanity is within a white supremacist framework. Like white people position themselves as human, and we are like, oh, they're taking away our humanity, but we just can't have the same freedom that's what the
because they're probably relying on Sylvia Wynter's work, who writes about humanity. Yeah, that's probably why. Yeah.
So like the theory is like white people are alive, indigenous people are half alive, and black people are dead. But that's why the Afro pessimist. I'm alive. What are you talking about? It's through the perception of white supremacist society, because like we can obtain whatever freedom they created for themselves, because that's not what's meant for us.
Yeah, I think one of my issues with some of that, it just flattens whiteness too. It keeps whiteness as a static category that has no history, no exploitation, none of that. Like just none of it. It just keeps as a static category that doesn't change over time. And so even, I know you gave an example of it's different than a cishet white guy. It depends on the cishet white guy. Some cishet white guys can say it. Some cishet white guys probably shouldn't. It's just the ones I organize with can say it, right?
The N-word?
No.
Oh,
you said prisoner.
Oh, okay. That's what it went to. I'm sorry.
Now they don't want to physically fight. If they want to physically fight, yes, they should.
That's what it went to.
No. When you said prisoner earlier, you said a cishet white person can't say, prisoner, because they have a different social location than you do.
Yeah,
you said that earlier.
Cishet white men who are not involved in these, because I work with cishet white
men.
Who are not involved in these realms, because they're looking at it from a different perception. They're internalizing not only white supremacy, but they're active agents of it.
Yeah.
So when they say prisoner, I'm like, okay, you're thinking of us as something positioned lesser than you. Like, yeah. And that kind of makes me think of this question. As a person with intersecting identities, I found it hard to be in community with other abolitionists who possess identities of privilege, or identities that are more privileged, because I am Black, I'm queer, I'm non-binary, I'm a woman. So all of that combined and I'm also neurodivergent. So all of that combined puts me in a very marginalized position. But then I'm working with other people, like white cishet men who are able-bodied, who are in who occupy such high positions of privilege. How have you navigated through that? It's been hard for me personally.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm just lucky. Well, no, that's not true. I'm not just lucky. I think that I've been really fortunate to be in organizing spaces where people constantly interrogate our relationship to power.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Constantly. So I think about someone who I organize with right now, who I guess is a cis-het white man. And he has certain relationship to power and privilege, but I have different relationships to power and privilege, right? I'm a lawyer. I have a Harvard Law degree. I live in a certain neighborhood now. We're constantly navigating. He's a full-time organizer, right? I have a fellowship at Columbia Law School, so it's well, how are we interrogating and naming these, and how they show up in our work, right? And it's also not the case that the ills that we're fighting are located in someone just because of their identity.
Exactly.
Right? So there are people who are queer who perpetuate homophobia in our space. And we have to say, exactly. Whoa, you probably shouldn't say that, right? People of all genders perpetuate patriarchy. It's it's a gender, it's not, Bell Hooks teaches us that. It has no gender. People perpetuate that. And so how are we, interrogating like what we're bringing to that space, and a lot of that requires transparency about where we are in our social location. And then other part of it is like, well, how does it show up in our organizing? And then what's our broader political project? Like, and then how are we measuring who's at the margins and who's not? Like, how does that actually get measured? You know, how does that look? And when I was in undergrad, the way that showed up was different than how I was in law school, and and it shows up differently now in my career. And so I think that when I say that I'm lucky, many of us are constantly deeply engaged in political education. We're reading together. We're asking questions of each other. We don't expect our space to be perfect. You know, we don't. We know that our social movement spaces are messy experiments in building the world that we want. Exactly. And so that means that you may say something racist if you're white. And you should expect that if you say something racist, me or someone in our space is going to tell you that, right? And because you're our comrade, you get to be like, well, let me think about that. You know, let me think about that. Let me figure out, you know, let me figure this out. And we're going to struggle together. But I'm not going to say you're violent, you can't come here anymore after the first time you say something racist. It's going to be like, well, let's work through that. But that hasn't happened in such a long time. I'm like, I just used to fight, but I don't fight anymore. Now we read now, which is great. No, reading is good. It's much safer than fighting, I guarantee. And so, yeah, I try to do that. And I do that in a space that's Black and multiracial. And we take time to struggle through those texts together to figure out what's showing up. And again, I know I'm quoting a lot of Black Panthers, but when Fred Hampton is reflecting his young, like, he was so young. Like, he was so young. When you read his work and you're reading, you know, his reflections, and he was like, you know what? We were so angry and so mad at what was going on that we were saying white when we should have been saying capitalist. That was one of my favorite bars. Where's the rap group? Y'all hear those bars?
No.
From the Black Panther Party? Those are bars. Because when you realize how they go and organize with the Young Lords and the Young Patriots, when they show up, the Young Patriots want to keep their Confederate flag. Like, that was the condition. I'm nervous today. This TikTok generation would have been like, whoa, that's violent, can't show up, can't organize. But after months and months and months of deep political education, of going to that part of Chicago and saying, hey, it stinks over here. And I know y'all smell it because I can smell it 30 blocks away. You know, the police, they beating us up. They beating y'all up too. You know, y'all can't get ambulances. We can't get ambulances either. And it took like a coalition of people with very different backgrounds to come together and to engage in deep political education, critical thought, and fights. And I mean this, and fights to be in that messy experiment of the world that they want. And sometimes I wish we drew more, this younger generation of organizers drew more on that messy work. Because if it's just going to be the first time where you're trying to build with someone and they're just like, no, like this isn't going to work because just your identity alone, then that's not going to push us towards a more liberatory future, right? Or if you aren't willing to be criticized, if you aren't willing to be like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that, that's sexist, then you're not going to make it either in our organizing spaces. And so if anyone in the entire world is going to try to figure out how to work across, you know, times when it's difficult to move us, to transition us to a more just society, hopefully it's the people who already know that we're showing up with all the social condition that we were talking about earlier. And we're saying, well, I'm here. Let's figure it out. But that doesn't also mean tolerate when people actually become violent. Right, or tolerate when people are committed to holding on to terrible ideas, because then you do have to polarize and you do have to split and say, well, this is the end of our journey together. You can take that over there. We're going to take this over here. And then we're going to figure out how to keep struggling and fighting for the kinds of freedom we believe in. But I think that we really should look at what Grace and Jimmy Boggs were doing in Detroit, what the Black Panthers was doing in Chicago, and even in Kansas City. You know, it's a lot of the Black and multiracial organizing just kind of gets erased out of history. And I think that's very intentional. Because if the Black Panthers just get to fight for Black people, we don't learn about all these other coalitions, it's easier to keep people siloed. And then the only way you bring them together is when you say stuff like BIPOC. I don't want BIPOC. I want coalitions where people are fighting for freedom. Like, it's not enough, right? So I'm sorry, I'm in my feelings now. But that matters a lot to me. I want us to learn more from that, to figure out how to navigate in these spaces, how to fight better, how to, you know, dream better.
Before we move on to the next question, could you explain the term cisgender and heterosexual?
Can you explain it?
Oh yeah,
Okay,
I'll explain. So basically, cisgender person, they identify with their gender that were assigned with birth. So a male, somebody who's born male and identifies a man, they're cisgender. And heterosexual is just someone who's attracted to the same sex. But well, not just. It's not. Yeah.
Well, not same sex.
Oh, opposite. I'm sorry, y'all.
Well, not necessarily
I'm
opposite
sorry.
either, because then that assumes that an opposite sex of a male is a
Gender and
female.
sex, I mean, like sexuality are very nuanced and fluid topics. I'm gonna just say that right now. But I wanted to make this as accessible as possible, especially because when I was first doing this work, I didn't know what those terms meant. Even though I am queer and non-binary, I was like, what the hell are y'all talking about? But like as time went, I learned and accumulated that knowledge, and I wanted to give y'all that opportunity as well. But the next question I wanted to ask, because we've been talking about community a lot, and especially in the realm of building community with people that come from very different backgrounds. And I did, like I said, it was very hard for me. And I think a lot of how hard that was because of fear, especially as a Black non-binary woman growing up in the South. The brutality that I faced was perpetuated by those cishet white men that I work with now. So a lot of that resonates with the fear, and that fear continues even in the work that I do today. So I wanted to ask, like, what does it look like to build community through an abolitionist framework and still coinciding with your story and going through that?
I think my answer is similar to what I said last time.
Mm-hmm.
I think fear is important. It's a very important emotion. I don't think it's fair to tell people to be fearless or to describe people as fearless. I think it's important to be relentless and work with your fear.
Mm-hmm.
And fear gives you information. Like if you're not afraid, then that's a little scary because it means that you know and you just don't care, or you don't know how bad something really is. And so it's it's like I remember one time I have a kid who just is 8 now, and I try as a young parent to like give him a certain look that my mom used to give me, like a certain look, but it didn't work. And so I was like, oh, that look is supposed to scare you. But if you're not scared, it's because you don't know that it's supposed to do that. So fear, I think, is an important, just an important emotion to tell you how to operate through things. And so, and I think that it can be scary. I think that what we're trying to do is scary in a world that constantly beats it down. Exactly. So if you're at risk of like the interpersonal stuff that happens with the people you organize with, and then if you're actually doing radical organizing, you're putting yourself at risk to surveillance and violence and imprisonment and incarceration. Like that's another level of fear. And then there are people who are afraid to do things because they can't get that back, as the generation is saying these days. They can't get that money, the moolah, whatever you call it. Yeah, so they can't do that. And so it's like, well, what kinds of fears do you have? And so for people who are, and I said this at the lunch earlier, that just because you are afraid of something and you decide, you should figure out like how to say something or acknowledge it anyway. And acknowledging it doesn't mean that there may not be consequences, but it's very important that you acknowledge how you feel in the situation that's going on and to own that agency. And so I just encourage people to name when they're afraid. I name when I'm afraid. I name when I'm in my feelings, like I did 5 minutes ago. And I said, I'm just in my feelings right now. Because it just helps me, show up more authentically as myself, to be more human, as we were talking about earlier. And just it just allows me to be vulnerable and to be honest. I say when I'm angry, I say when I'm afraid, I say when I'm happy, I say when I'm excited, and I mean those things. Like I mean it when I say it. And I think that it's an invitation for other people to name how they feel too, and that allows us to work through whatever we're working through together.
So doing this work, what are you most afraid of?
I'm afraid of so much. I think that I'm afraid that that there's it's so weird because I've never imagined myself saying stuff like the younger generation. But having talked to a lot of college students at this point, I'm afraid that people are afraid of working through interpersonal conflict. And I think that I'm nervous at how social media conditions a younger generation to vent about interpersonal conflict, but not deal with it and struggle through it and then expect to be okay at the end. That's what I'm nervous about. I'm nervous. And that's different than like cancel culture. Like, it's not that. I think cancel culture actually can be very important. I'm nervous about, like, I'm not going to try to do this thing anymore because, like, I tried, this thing happened, everything's violent, I'm like done. I'm nervous about that. I'm afraid of what that means for our sustainability. I'm afraid that people are going to think that what the task before us is too overwhelming. So they're just going to default to smaller projects and say, I'm just going to do mutual aid. I don't do this other stuff. When we need like strategic, robust organizing that builds coalitions to wrest power from people who had it. I'm nervous about that. I'm nervous about surveillance and police violence. And I say, please hear me. In the last 60 years, the right to protest has become under attack so much, and people kind of say, they shake their head and then they move on. It's getting harder and harder and harder to protest with more punishments, and it's getting easier to be arrested for anything you do towards police. A couple of weeks ago, I was in London, and they passed a huge criminalization act that a one-person protest could be considered like violent because it's a nuisance, right? Not because someone has a weapon or a bomb. Just if it's a nuisance, this person can be arrested. So I'm nervous that people are giving up more and more rights and opportunities to raise hell, and allowing states to pass laws that make police a protected class. It's happening. So in Missouri, where I'm from, just not too far, just right over there, just a little west. I have a lot of Midwestern pride. I love being from the Midwest. I love being a Black woman from the Midwest. And when I first became a lawyer, I had to look at all of these states that were passing laws that essentially made cops a protected class, right? And they were also passing laws to decriminalize people who attack protesters. And so people know how decriminalization works. They're not worried about community safety then when they're passing laws saying, well, if people are blocking the road and you drive them over with your car, you won't be prosecuted. Because that's the kind of decriminalization that's happening right now. And so I'm nervous that people see bad news and watch these laws get passed and just go, man, that's messed up. And then they go on to the next thing. I'm afraid of that. What else I'm afraid of? You want everything I'm afraid? I'm afraid I'm not going to pay all my student loans back. That's a real thing. Yeah. I guess Joe canceled $10,000, $20,000 for some people. You gotta like not pass go, collect your money, go to jail. It's a whole lot of loopholes. When education should be free, all education should be free. Education should always be free, including y'all. I hope y'all fight for free education here. I feel like it costs a lot of money. It's a nice building. I feel like a lot of y'all got student loans to pay for this building right here. How much?
$80,000.
$80,000.
Yeah. Full tuition and housing. Yeah, $80,000.
I mean,
I don't pay that, but there's some people.
So yeah, so somebody's loans are paying for this building right now. So I hope y'all fight for tuition caps and free education. But yeah, I have a lot of things I'm afraid of.
I think to appease some of that fear, especially in the realm of our generation, I have a lot of hope for the Black youth. I do. Okay. I have a lot of hope. Especially, I'm also I'm a preschool teacher, so I teach kids, and in my generation, and I guess they will be a different generation, yeah. In the generation that are younger than us, they're more we're taking on tactics of resolving conflict. We're not only within ourselves but also within our family units. Like not trying to pass down generational trauma, heavy on not passing down generational trauma. And then also within friends. Like I have been, when me and my friend, one of my friends actually, we recently got in an argument about dinner. And then I was just like, me when I was younger, before I would have known the things that I know now, especially within the realm of conflict resolution. But doing this work has helped me. And I was like, I need to talk to her about this because I love her and that's my friend. And this is something that I want to keep and maintain with because I need community. Yeah. And so coming to those conclusions, I think a lot of people are. And when I teach children, we're passing on those same notions. People like me and other people who do work with children and who do work with just the youth in general, they're teaching them something that we weren't taught before, and they're also trying to build community that was never offered to us, especially Black youth, and especially growing up in predominantly white spaces. So I wanted to appease a little bit of that fear you had.
I got hope too. You asked me about hope. You just said fear.
Oh, you want to talk about hope?
Yeah.
Let's talk about hope. Or actually, this is something I want to talk about.
Okay.
I love bell hooks. And I love love. Love is a guiding force for me, especially in the realm of Black liberation. I wouldn't do this work if I didn't love my people, but I love them to death. So I wanted to, and you talk about revolutionary love in your book. So I wanted to ask you, how essential do you believe revolutionary love is to being an abolitionist, to doing this work?
I think it's very essential.
Why is it essential?
Why is it essential? Why is revolutionary love essential? So it's interesting when you were saying that, you look at the kids that you work with, and they give you a lot of hope. The people who give me the most amount of hope, honestly, are the elders that I work with. And Barbara Ransby is going to kill me for calling her an elder. But she says this all the time. She said, I'm a yelder, I'm a young elder. But when I think about people like Barbara Ransby, who's been like organizing and freedom fighting for 40 years, and is not, I don't want to say she's not tired, but organizing, annoyed at what we're doing sometimes, but organizing, have seen wins and losses, but is organizing. I'm just like, because you can't just rely on, you can look at a kid, I can look at my kids and say, man, y'all don't know how terrible the world is yet, and I'm so happy that you have all this youthful energy to like go fight the good fight. It's much harder to do that with people who've been through Reagan and Nixon and Trump.
Yeah.
And to then be like, oh yeah, we're going to be free. That's remarkable to me. That is revolutionary love to me, to be committed to a project long term. When I think about Angela Davis, who doesn't call herself a revolutionary, but someone who aspires to be a revolutionary, and I'm like, dang, you aspiring to be a revolutionary? Because if that's the bar, then I am underground. Like what? Like So I get, excuse me, I get inspired by people who, like I called Mumia out earlier, and Mutulu Shakur, like people who've been in prison for like 50, 40 years, and are just still fighting to get free, calling to make sure that other political prisoners can get free. Pete O'Neal is a Black Panther who was in Kansas City, and because of COINTELPRO, is still living in exile in Africa today, right now. What's today?
October 26th.
October 26th. Oh, 26th is 27th. Yeah, my baby's birthday is the 26th. 27th is living in Tanzania right now, running a school right now, has not seen his family in decades right now. And when President Obama was commuting sentences, there were people who were saying, please bring Pete home. And you know what he said? He said, look, if there's any chance to get political prisoners out of jail, like Mumia, don't even call for me to come home. Please put all of your attention to getting other people out of prison. That's revolutionary love to me. Like watching people make those kind of sacrifices, literally lose people, have people die, and say, I am committed to this freedom struggle long term. That is revolutionary love to me. And I don't know how always to describe it, but I know that it requires risk. I know it requires experimentation. I know that it requires sacrifice. I know that it's deeply curious and pragmatic. You know, and sometimes it's messy. Like sometimes it's messy. Read some love letters between some socialists. It gets real messy. I be like, wow, like these were the fights. These are the people. If y'all have a chance to talk to people who are involved in SNCC, ask them about the sex lives of SNCC organizers. Messy, 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 right? But to be at a table and to sit at the feet of these people and hear them talk about, yeah, you know, these people were sleeping around, and then 50 years later they laughing together and trying to figure out how to teach, you know, Dream Defenders and BYP 100 how to do archives to protect our labor and our work. I mean, that is revolutionary love to me. And so I am deeply, deeply, deeply grateful to be, you know, at least strive to be a part of that longer tradition of people who are trying to do all of that and hold it together.
The comment about Angela Davis saying she doesn't identify as
she's aspiring.
Yeah, that threw me, definitely. But I think that revolutionary love for me kind of fits into the theory of like Bell Hooks, like her book All About Love and how she views love, and like it is not just something that like we can manifest out of thin air, but it's a combination of things, especially when it comes to respect and trust and effort. Very heavy on effort. And I think that goes hand in hand with revolutionary love, because you're talking about how people have dedicated their lives, their literal lives, to doing this work for people that they love and for the work that they love. And that is revolutionary. And I wanted to ask you what. Oh, I have one question. We're good? Okay. So my last question is, because you're talking about our elders, but I wanted to ask, what do you think the future holds for the next generation of abolitionists? What defining obstacles do you think will shape these future abolitionists?
Well, I hope that the future generation of abolitionists are not defined by an age. Mm-hmm. That's what I really hope. That like people can be a generation who's connected by their introduction to ideas, mm-hmm. and not necessarily when they were born. Like, cause there are new abolitionists who are in their 70s. And that's exciting. Yeah. That's a new generation of abolitionists. Mm-hmm. That's like people who can struggle and throw down. And I got an email from this organization early this year. I think they're called the Progressive Elders Network. And they were like, hey, we just picked up your book, and you know, it's real cool. We didn't realize that that's what they was talking about when they said defund the police. And I was like, okay, well, that's great. Like, this is a good starting place. Mm-hmm. And so I would hope that, you know, whenever people are coming to a movement, we are connected by our exposure to our ideas, that we get to celebrate and welcome that, and not just, you know, assume that you have to be young to be willing to be introduced to something. Mm-hmm. And you're always open to learning at any part of your life. At any part of your life, you're open to being curious about new ideas that are entering the world. And that runs counter to what mainstream society says about people as they age. Definitely. Which is the older you get, the more conservative you get. Which is really, the older you get, the more money you get, the more stability you get, the more conservative you get. Because anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But yes, I think that we have to challenge that narrative by showing people of all ages, being introduced to ideas, and being willing to struggle across age, but producing new generations of knowledge and connectiveness.
Like we can learn from each other.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think I wasn't really that nervous. I really like talking to you.
Please make your way to the microphone to ask questions. We're going to take about 15 minutes. We're going to take about 15 minutes for Q&A. Hey, you keep the closest mic to Japan, and we will take questions.
Also, even if you don't have a question, but if you're a member of an organization, yes, or campaign, and you would like to tell people about an event that's happening or a way that they can sign up, I highly encourage you to use this time to do that.
I love it.
know normally people shun that part and be like, no, don't say something, don't make announcements. I really encourage it, because don't ask me about abolition. Ask some people here who are working on that. So please, I encourage you to do that.
Okay, everybody's at one mic. I think it's perfect. Mr. You can't hear me? Oh, it's not working?
Here, you want this one?
It's fine. I'm being told you all can't hear me in the back. So everybody lined up at that mic, and I'm completely fine with it. Please, by all means, just ask your questions in the order that you're in line. You're on, Mr. Farrell.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation between you two. I am a former critical resistance staff member and member for some years in the early 2000s. And one of the reasons, I was the first Southern Region coordinator. So
in
I'm
Atlanta? In New Orleans?
In New Orleans, yeah.
Oh, we got to talk. I read about New Orleans in the book.
Okay, that I was I was the first staff person in New Orleans organizing the South.
Oh, amazing.
But,
so Hurricane Katrina worked.
Yeah. Prior to that,
yes,
actually. But
right. Okay.
I'm from here and moved back here 2 years ago from New York. But anyway, my question is, how do we deal with, as we think about the project of abolition, the work it takes to sort of do the kinds of mobilizations that we see when people die at the end of a police revolver, through the other systems in our society through which people also perish prematurely? And in some ways, it was why I sort of left the prison abolition movement as a structure, even though I carry that work where else I go, because now working particularly in the last 10 to 15 years in public health, there's so many ways in which most of us die prematurely through other means, right? And there are often or almost never the kinds of the funding, the infrastructure, the organizing to deal with those other kinds of systems. I'm just curious to know, we think about, just the prison, the jail, the police, but what about, but the hospital, the other spaces through which, premature death happens, right, in our society, and how do we connect those so that we see the same kinds of energy as people, deal with those systems?
So much, for a lot of different reasons. Fred Moten, he has this quote that reminds me of what you just said, which is, policy kills more Black people than police do, right? Which is true. The issue is that policy isn't on the street shooting you, right? And so again, it's the spectacular form of violence. When we look at the history of uprisings in the U.S., what gets people out into the streets is just immediate contact with police, because that's what people who live in exploited neighborhoods come into contact with every day. Elizabeth Hinton's book, America on Fire, is a really good example of this. She's just like, well, why are all these rebellions rooted in this thing that happens and not necessarily people dying behind closed doors at a hospital? Right, but Black people know. Black people, there's this joke about these hospitals in Newark, which is, if you get shot, make sure you go to this hospital because they'll treat you. But if you have a heart attack, don't go there because they're not going to save your life, right? So I think that people are critical of that. And if we look in a broader Black radical tradition, the same groups of people who tend to be organizing against police violence, like the Black Panthers, again, also were committed to figuring out health stuff. When you read the 10-point program, Black people wanted freedom from all forms of oppression. Black people were the people who started the first paramedics, in this country, because of the lack of quality access to healthcare. Dream Defenders right now opened up a free community health clinic called Doctors Within Borders because of this reason that you explained. And so I think that for a lot of the organizing that I'm a part of and a lot of political work that I'm a part of, police and prisons become an entry point for people, but it's not where they stay, right? It becomes an entry point for them to get connected to other kinds of work. That's why I think bail reform is like a really big issue. And then a lot of people were like, oh yeah, well, what are the conditions surrounding why people are being held? Well, they lose their jobs. So how do we fight for universal basic income and jobs guarantee? People are getting evicted left and right. And who comes to enforcing evictions? The police. Well, how do we organize against evictions like Kansas City tenants are doing, over in Missouri. Like it's police. I usually am noticing is the entry point, but it's not where the organizing stops. So when the movement for Black Lives issued like their vision for Black Lives, it wasn't just about police and prisons, right? It was about, you have right. Okay, excuse me. So you know the answer. Just say the answer. Don't be asking me the question. You know the answer. Just tell the people. So excuse me, the part that you have right. Yes. So what? So if you were on a policy table, that's sort of how it works. It's like, well, how do we make sure that we're fighting for broader, comprehensive policies that then address all this other stuff? What's different is that police still get lots of funding, and it's easier to control police funding because it's connected to municipal budgets. If you go to City Hall, you should be able to protest and have something to say. So I think that people are navigating that, and the spectacular acts of violence make it easier to show like this is a terrible, terrible system. And so we have to fight all of it. But I don't know, and you can let me know too, because you've been doing this work longer than I have. What other forms of particular of violence that can happen like that in a hospital that leads to the same sort of like outpouring, outcrying historically that leads to that kind of mobilization. I'm not familiar with that history. I mostly know it through prisons, police, and white supremacist violence, those sorts of killings, or school incidents. School's another quick place. Again, the people who are in a neighborhood or in a community know each other. People are in the hospital. It's a different kind of relationship. And so I think that's a question that's worth interrogating. I just would need to think more about how it can lead to mass mobilization when a lot of that stuff is spontaneous and organic. That's a good question. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Montefinest. I am another founding member of the Western Reserve Abolition Project. So we are an organization working towards prison abolition in Ohio. If you'd like to get involved with us or want to get connected to us in any way, just come see us or any of my peers from this second row right here. You could also, of course, talk to Maria about it. Please come talk with us.
Hi. I haven't read your book, but I'm glad I got the opportunity to hear you speak what's in your book. The biggest situation for me is I'm hearing things that I've heard 60 years ago. And I'm reading, or all the things that I've read, all the way up to the 1870s and pre the Civil War and post the Civil War, where organizations started by Black people doing basically the same thing you're talking about, and basically the things that were done pre-Martin Luther King. And then there was a halt after the so-called signing of civil rights this and civil rights that. And then the awakening that took place due to the orange thing and, and COVID, which brought everything back to life. It's really weird to hear what you're saying and what I've already been through, heard, and understood. And all of these programs, abolitionists, all these people that brought up social things, the Black Panthers that started in Oakland, and previous to that, all the work that has been done, it comes to one certain point and then it dissipates due through the FBI or any other government situation. So I'm looking at it with a pessimistic and believing that things may or may not change in regards to that, because I've seen too many of the things not change, or they're repackaged. The situation that happened in between after Martin Luther King in regards to making people believe that things have changed, along with the use of advertisement, which has changed the attitudes of people. I could tell stories when I grew up. No one followed anyone. Everyone created their own independence. It wasn't until the late 70s into the 80s when people started following people, where people believe that if I don't have those tennis shoes, which you're talking about capitalism, which is key point into advertisement, that they were killing people or we were killing each other in regards to that. So I'm not asking a question, but I'm putting a statement out and stating that, is there a way that it will continue? Because I look back at what happened to Black Wall Street, and then nothing else took place after that, which was a horrendous situation. And the other, I think, 10 to 15 other communities, cities that started after the Civil War and were able to build and do things that people didn't believe that Black people could do. Yeah. And all of a sudden they got torn down, blown up, people killed, and nothing else happened after that. I know what takes place. I know who's responsible. But I think all of us we have to get together in order to fight it. I don't know how we're going to do this because we don't have that much power, but will we have enough power together to do so?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think so. When you were talking, I was thinking about two things, right? The continuities of history and the discontinuities of history. So what keeps going and what changes? And when you were talking, I was like, well, wow, what has changed like in this empire, right? One thing that's changed is that the certain kinds of demands that have left the community has shifted, right? So abolition and defund the police was not a mainstream demand 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago. First sets of demands around policing, excuse me, were that, Black people, that police respond to harm in Black neighborhoods at the same rate that they respond in white neighborhoods, right? Which is, there was an initial belief that, okay, now Black people are becoming citizens or moving closer to citizenship. How do we make sure that our citizenship has the same value as other people? So one of those early demands was, well, we want people respond. What about Black on Black crime kind of starts as that. It doesn't start as a critique of activists. It kind of starts as a critique of police. It's like, oh, y'all only care about white crime. What about crime in our neighborhoods, right? And then we see after the rebellions in the late 60s and 70s, the demand shifts to, oh, we need more diverse police officers, And you start seeing waves of police, Black people joining police forces like in Atlanta and the Midwest. And then you have Baldwin write and say, oh my gosh, I know we asked for this, but no, do not recommend, very bad. Like, this is not good, right? So then you start seeing critiques of Black people entering police. And then you start seeing the rise of Black mayors, right next door in Indiana, Hatcher, Gary, yes, exactly. So then you start seeing the rise of a Black political class. And so that becomes an initial demand, right? And then what happens after that? Critiques of a Black misleadership class. And so what's interesting is that by following the discontinuities as well, you see that some of the mainstream demands are then followed by sets of critiques of like, well, actually, this happened with students too. You have the first Black Studies department happen in San Francisco, University of San Francisco State University. And you have students protesting wanting more Black faculty. Then the kind of Black faculty that universities hired were not radical. They actually were perpetuating the status quo. And so then you have students organize and say, well, we actually want more progressive faculty. So I think that part of the pessimism I completely understand, and it's hard. I share a lot of things I'm afraid of. But I think what I've also learned by watching history is that the things that we've demanded have become more nuanced and more clear. So now I remember crying when President Obama got elected, being like, oh my God, like this happened, like, wow, this is amazing. And then I also watched the Black Lives Matter movement erupt and say, oh yeah, a Black president won't stop Black people from being killed. That's insufficient for liberation. And I watched those critiques go louder the more that I saw Black people being appointed in office. When I saw VP Kamala Harris, I saw those critiques much more by the people who are in college now than who were in college, when President Obama got elected. So it's like, well, how do we use the continuity of history to inform our pessimism about what may not change? And then how we use discontinuities of history to inform better demands that we have on the public? Because in 2014, the main demand was not defund and abolish the police. The main demand was diversity, body cameras, consent decrees. And I know y'all know about consent decrees here. right? These were the demands. Please, a DOJ, come to our city and help us. That wasn't the case in 2020. And I think that's an important shift. And it's like, well, how can we use that shift to then help us create better demands for the future? And I know one thing I can say, and I 1000% agree with you, that we see the disintegration of a lot of our movements because of one of the fears that I named, which is surveillance and how hard it is becoming for us to protest. And when we say defund the police, that includes FBI. And the FBI was founded in order to be a counterinsurgent institution. It was founded to stop communist and socialist organizations from critiquing capitalism and building social movements. So we also have to call into questions federal law enforcement agencies that somehow became heroes under Donald Trump for standing up. When I was like, whoa, y'all know who the FBI is and what they do, right? Just because one person in the agency stood up to the president, now the whole department is a hero? How did that happen? Where are the books? This is why they banned critical race theory. Where are the books? We gotta talk about this history. And so we have to continue to call out the violent activities of law enforcement agencies who help to disintegrate our social movements. But I feel you, and I hear you on the pessimism. I think that's real.
Change the things. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, I don't know where police have been abolished or defunded anywhere. So, okay. I thought you said it's already been. I thought you said it's already been used.
No, but to add on to Derecka's point, I think. Oh, sorry, I just want to add on.
No, please.
But to add on to Derecka's point, I want to shine some semblance of optimism is because that our generation and the generations primarily doing this work now, they're learning what our ancestors and the people that worked before us, what they did wrong, what went wrong. I think a common occurrence is that we kept making the same mistakes, and now we're like, we can't do that. Like, we know that people surveil us, so we have technology is the format in which we mobilize, and we know how important it is. So now we're becoming hyper aware that there could be a police officer surveilling us through our phones, and they could be following us through social media. And I think
could be in this room right now. Yeah. Raise your hand, out yourself. We know that you're here.
And also, there's a lot of people in the movement that believe that unifying in a monolithic manner was most important. That we couldn't be different and unified simultaneously. Like the movement of respectability politics in the early 1920s in the Black community, the Black arts movement and the Black liberation and Panther movement during the 1960s, they wanted cishet men to be the focal point, and they were ostracizing queer people. They were dehumanizing, degrading Black women. Like, now we understand that our differences is the only thing that's going to keep us going forward. And if we take those two notions and work with that, I think that we can sustain a concrete movement.
Hi. Thank you for coming today. Of course. Very lovely. Thank you. So I work at the Council for American and Islamic Relations downtown, and my main project is related to this topic we're talking about, and it's sending religious requests to prisoners in Ohio. And I've never been shocked by anything I've read. It's been pretty much what I've expected. So it's not like, oh, I'm surprised at the conditions or anything. But it's like you said when you were talking about, oh, I didn't know police were killing 3 people. I didn't know that when someone gets out of prison and they're on parole, that if they forget to verify their address, they go back to prison for 2 years. That was really shocking to me. And I also didn't know that if you try to send them the religious requests that they want, like Qurans and things that prisons are not going to distribute them unless you force their hand. And I'm one person working on this, in the office, and I'm getting these back saying on the packages not allowed. And inside would be like brochures. And I'm like, why wasn't this allowed? You call the prison and they're like, well, it has pictures on it. And it angers me, and my manager says, you're making an impact. You're getting like phone calls. And I'm like, well, what can I do more? Because what they're telling me is I can't be mean, or they'll punish the prisoners and not give them the packages. And it's like, well, this needs to be a more widespread thing. But not a lot of people in Ohio care about people in prison, And you hear like the election ads saying like, this candidate wants to give money to prisoners. They want to give money to rapists and criminals more than you guys. And it's like, prisoners are citizens of our society, And it's like, I guess what's the answer as one person? Like, I guess that's what you just letting people know like this is happening. There are like 10,000 prisoners in Ohio, 28 prisons, and we're building more prisons, and it's getting worse.
Yeah. Well, one thing is just to find other people, and so I know this for sure because I know this for sure. There are lots of people who campaign against prisoners, against states who ban prison literature. And so there's a whole network of people across the country who work on this. And so I would highly encourage you to find out who those people are, either in Ohio or in other parts of the country. And so even in my book, I had to print a completely different book for people who are incarcerated. A completely different book without the cover, like a completely different thing. And we made sure that it got to prisons for free, but we had to I don't want to say sneak it in, but we had to do a completely separate thing because hardback books are not allowed in prison. And anything that can be deemed of inciting violence. And so my book had to have a plain white and black cover, and that's how we got it in. And then there are people who organize against, this much more loudly, and they just say, no, like this is wrong. Like we can't allow this. And so a lot of the critical race theory bans, book bans that we're seeing now have existed in prisons for decades. And we just assume that the fascism would just stay contained behind bars. No, whenever there's fascism in the country, it's going to seep into the rest of society. And we've been content with allowing that fascism to exist in our prisons. If we read George Jackson's work, that's what he says. Fascism is here, it's been here. And when we talk about reforming prisons, we're talking about reforming fascism. Like this is the location of it. This is the site of it. And so I would highlight, there's lots of people who are doing this work, especially people who work on political prisoner campaigns, right? So I would encourage you to look at, I think it's called the Prison Society of Pennsylvania, because I think they have a campaign around getting literature into prisons, and then they can probably connect you to other people who are doing that in Ohio and other parts of the country. And then again, that's how you build networks, and then how you build community, and then how you come up with strategy of how to fix the problem. I know it sounds easy, but it's not easy. It's not going to be that easy. But that's why I encourage you to start figuring out the actual hard solution that it'll take to get done. Yeah, of course. Thank you.
About the issue of policing. I've given significant thought to this matter, and it has occurred to me that part of the problem of why we continue to have issues with policing is because the way this nation was organized. There are two fundamental organizing principles, the primary one being capitalism that people have spoken about. But when you really think about it at the very base level, capitalism was operationalized through white supremacy. When we think about the colonies and the establishment of this nation, we couldn't have gotten to the place that we're this economic behemoth without slavery. And slavery, when you create the axis of capitalism and then racism as the two fundamental polarities, not only did they establish how the nation was organized, but it gave root to an energy to continue these things. And so when we build out the nation through capitalism and racism, white people and Black people gained identity through the interplay of these two principles. And so as we talk about policing emerged through the slave patrols. And so when we look at our politics today, we see policing as a fundamental polarity. And it's used in that way because Black people experience and deal with policing from one side, and white people perceive it and deal with it from another. So we see it being used in the political arena. We get this argument about funding police, defunding police, because when you say funding police, that says safety to white America. When you say funding police to Black America, it says trauma. And so until we get the courage to look at these fundamental organizing principles of capitalism as it is operationalized through white supremacy, we'll never be able to deal with the problems of policing, because that is the fundamental play. And we have to also acknowledge that there are forces in this society that have been institutionalized, and their main objective is to continue the system as it is. And so when I think Ms. Rita was talking about, I've seen this 60 years ago, it's because the forces that perpetuate to underscore and undergird capitalism through white supremacy and all other identities come through that intersection. So we get class and we get race. And I think until we find the courage as a collective and build community to really interrogate these issues for what they create in the society, we'll always see it happening over and over and over. So my question to you is, how do we, as we fight the food processor that policing can be, how do we devote some energy to looking at the big picture and say, this keeps regenerating because we've never dealt with the intersection of capital and race?
Again, y'all are asking some incredible questions, and y'all already know the answer. So you be asking me the question, we really got the answer that you want to share. It was yes, capitalism, absolutely, and through enslavement, right? But before it was experimenting and perfecting with Black people. You know, policing comes out of the UK colonizing the Irish. So these are white people colonizing other groups of white people and using police as a way of managing those borders and creating those identities. So that's why I appreciate Cedric Robinson's work on racial capitalism and Black Marxism so much. He's criticizing the formation of race and identity using Europe as a model and say, well, a lot of this violence was experimented on through European societies and the development of race. And so that's why I would get nervous when people would say, oh, our police, we should have police like police in London. They don't have guns, they have little funny hats. Like, we should do that. When we look at how police were developed in London, they came through colonialism, right? Like, and then what happened? We borrowed those systems in the Northeast, and what do we use it to suppress labor, right? And then what do we do in the Caribbean? We use it to catch slaves. Like, the word cop comes from a Latin word that was used by Spanish people to capture slaves, capere, right? And so that history is so integral. And I agree with you. Not only should we interrogate and talk about that history, it's clearly threatening to people, which is why they're banning the discussion of the origins of this country, because it makes little white children feel bad, right? That's the justification for not telling the truth. And it makes me sad. Like, it makes me sad. Like, why do I see Black people as the main people fighting the banning of like this history, right? When I think I often feel bad for white children, because when I grew up where we talked about Black heroes all the time, who did all kinds of things. If you're a white kid growing up in a society, you have like two sides, really. You get like white liberals, or you get like white oppressors. There's no interesting progressive white radical tradition that's taught to white children. They don't get to learn about John Brown and Helen Keller being anti-racist and socialist. They just get to learn about slave catchers and then people who tried to be abolitionists but were still wedded to capitalism. And I'm just like, wow, y'all don't care about white history? Because that's white history too. Y'all got to fight for y'all history too, right? It makes me so sad. And so I agree with you that we do have to interrogate that. When I mean interrogate and talk about, I don't mean what a lot of universities do, which is create a task force. Abolish task force. That's the new abolition wave. Because y'all, we know, we task force, we know. So we have to get past task force. We have to get past the declarations that get passed in city councils and on Congress floors and say, okay, in 10 years, we'll start thinking about the right time where we can turn our pages and get together and think about slavery. Because that's what the declarations essentially say. Like, we need a more robust commitment, right? It's like, okay, we're going to acknowledge it with intention of reparation, with the intention of undoing systems so we won't perpetuate. It wasn't as if slavery happened and then we're going to repair slavery and keep society as is, right? It has to be a complete transformative project, which is why I think some scholars are calling, not just scholars, but scholars and activists are using third Reconstruction as a way to think about reorganizing society, to think about this history, and to also think about what we can do in light of it, and to stop the systems that are ongoing today. So I just love your question so much, and we have to do all of it at the same time. And the reason why I keep coming back to the police, because the police are going to be the people who make sure that we don't. So when these critical race theory, bans happen, people protest, guess who's going to protest the people who are protesting, guess who's going to arrest the people protesting the critical race theory bans? The police. So when I say defund the police, even the reproductive justice movement, it was like the one time where I saw a lot of white women get scared, like, are we going to be arrested for abortions? So when we say defund the police, it's a reproductive justice issue, right? Because when you go in protest or you go try to get an abortion, who's going to lock you up? The police, exactly. So it's so integral, because that's who enforce, whether we learn information or not, whether our autonomy over our bodies or not. All these laws that are getting passed to ban trans kids from classrooms, from bathrooms, who's going to enforce that? The police. And so it's so integral to all the changes that you're talking about. So we have to talk about the history. We have to make sure that we create safe spaces to talk about that history and fight against institutions that threaten those spaces. Thank you for that question.
Good evening. I want to make a brief comment, and that is in regard to a lot of isms being spoken of tonight. Patriotism, I haven't heard ring any bells yet, but I'm going to put it in the air. And to that end, something that can be so duplicitous and kind of arrogant in the way that it's handled by not only the police, and not only the FBI through COINTELPRO, and currently their initiatives against secret police, which brings me to ideas of like the Stasi and over in Europe, and the fact that if you defund the police exclusively, are you not setting up the police to go underground and handle business in a much more nefarious nature? That being said, I'm going to go to a lighter note, where you spoke earlier about John Brown and young white children who don't know their proper history and their proper place in history beyond being slave owners and dastardly bastards. There's a gentleman over there by the name of George Sabino III. Please stand, Giorgio. This young man is a product of this university and is currently working on an app that's been incubated at MIT called Govia. And the idea that Govia is not to thrash or crush or chase police underground like so many cockroaches, but to reconsider the approach that makes it a safe endeavor for both parties and the community, as well as providing services to make sure you arrive safely if you should happen to be arrested, and have representation to take care of you. You can talk more about this after this conference. Thank you.
Are you auditioning for a commercial just now? You can't come over here sounding like that and then say thank you and walk and sit down. Thank you. Yes.
It is an honor to be in your presence, and I want to thank Case Social Justice Institute. I see Social Justice Institute. You may want to start another one called Human Justice Institute. This is a human justice issue when you talk about the ability to raise a population around structure sovereignty. When you look at suffering long lasted and the ability to be identified with the culture that was taken away through human trafficking. We was humanly trafficked here in America with no identity who was next to us on the boat. No one said, hey, you got Frank next to you, chained down too. Frank came from a village with his own identity, language, lifestyle, forced in chain on the boat. Came to America. Well, either the diaspora of the New World, but he came here. However, being here, Frank, Jesse, Mary, and Sue was given a new name. They was forced to grow a certain crop called cotton. Became one of the most powerful industrial commodity in the world. Didn't get 1 penny for it, not 1 penny. Then they went to sugarcane, peanuts, a host of other things. Didn't get 1 penny, not 1 penny for 600 years, not 1 penny. Barrister, you said think tank, right? Now, in 97, the federal government, when I was working in HIV and AIDS, we had patient zero in Cleveland. Giatan Dugas was patient zero in America. We had walls with steel around it in a secluded place. Now, I'm nervous. I don't see steel walls here. In the 97, I was shot in the heart twice, dead, 3 days, for getting a $4 million grant to help African Americans fight the spread of HIV. Dead, went to heaven, came back. I'm here now because of God. And he told me there would be a day like this. We are in the new beginnings. There would be a day where those who enslaved those people, the Cushites, our people, will have to go into slavery voluntarily. You said that you got good white people. Ask the sisters of the slavery Confederate who rewrote the books that our schools taught, took all our identity out of them, made us think that there was no slaves. George Washington didn't do nothing. John Drew didn't do nothing. The Daughters of the Confederates wrote the history books, called it civics. Didn't tell nobody about who was George Washington pointing when he was in the boat going to Washington, D.C. Just left us out of the history. Now, you said that. I'm going to tell you right now, become a reverend next. I'm going to send you. Yes, become a reverend so you'll have protection from the Lord.
Well, let me tell you right now, I am a Nat Turner Christian. So
Okay.
we are on the same, listen, we
Okay.
are on the same side.
'Cause
And let
you
me tell
wanna-
you one of my favorite quotes, another favorite quote from Frederick Douglass, who criticizes the story of Ham. You know the story of
Yes,
Ham. You got to know the
yes,
story of Ham, right?
Yes.
He says, you know what? It's interesting how they use the story of Ham to enslave us, to say that we were destined to be slaves. He said, there's been so many white men who's raped black women, whose descendants are now in the fields. You would think that the story of Ham is confused. And so, so I completely, I hear you. I hear you. I completely hear you. Yes.
2023,
Okay.
the universe is going to open up and there will be a moment for change. So I'm like Jesus right now. When they got ready to throw the stone at Mary Magdalene, he said, who want to catch the first stone? Throw it. I'm only telling you what Jesus.
No, I appreciate you so much. And
Okay.
it's so funny you mentioned that
Yes.
story because
Okay,
I
Doc.
actually write about
No,
it in the
I'm-
book.
I'm
But thank
good.
you.
I've delivered my message.
Thank you so much. What's your name again?
Reverend Dr. Patrick J. Reynolds.
Reverend Dr. Thatcher J. Reynolds. Thank you so much.
25 plus years.
house, the Wisdom Building?
We'll talk after.
I'm getting ready to go.
Okay. Oh, well, we won't talk after. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming.
We just can't stay all night, brother.
I'll say continue.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Reed Dog. It's about
Can
uninvited.
you mind saying your name one more time?
It's Reed Dog.
Ray Dog.
Reed Dog.
Reed Dog. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet y'all. It's about uninvited Cleveland. It's about lead poison. All houses got lead poison. Kids been dying from it all day. Water getting poisoned out here. We trying to pass out water filters. Cause I was praying for everybody out here. I go to church every Sundays. I feel blessed out here.
How's everybody doing? Before I get to my comment, I just want to say for the white people and economically privileged people in the building, I'm experiencing an economic crisis, and I don't want to have to be a victim before I get recognized, white people. Because typically it's like a reactive sort of a conscience. Like if the police came in here, they kill me, you guys would wear t-shirts, you guys would rally. But if I tell you right now, I'm trying to take care of my daughter right now, and I'm alive, let's see how much they care. White people. I'm a local organizer too. I organize about the issue of lead poison. I don't know if anybody cares about that. It's another systemic form of racism where they take the children's functionality of their brain. It leads to criminal activity too, white people. Please help me. I'm going through an economic crisis. And my comment was, why does an institution established by white supremacists called an educational university give you more of a credibility? Anybody ever heard of Dr. Sebi? Yeah, he believed that our westernized educational system actually crippled young students, did not make them experts. It actually kind of handicapped their learning curve. Like herbologists, instead of actually learning, touching the herbs, they would learn from textbooks, things like that. So why does that make us an expert in, social matters, being, confirmed and certified through an institution of white supremacy as a minority and a black, see, even black, that's racist right there. But as a young minority, for lack of a better term, I feel alienated here, and I feel discouraged, and I feel like it's less hope because you have a false sense of accomplishment. The fact you're in a room together, white people, you go back to the suburbs. The black people, you go back to acting white to fit in the room with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, what's the name of your organization?
Undivided Cleveland. White people, please help me. I'm going through a financial crisis. Racism.
Thank you.
I just want to make an announcement. I want to let everybody know about the No New Jail campaign. How many people here are aware that the county government has been trying to build, as of the current estimate is a $750 million jail on a toxic waste site here in Cuyahoga County, here in Cleveland. I want to bring this up because this is Cleveland. It's a majority BIPOC city in a majority European American state. It's a city with the first black mayor of a major American city, Carl Stokes, here in Cleveland, in a very poor city. And for these and many other reasons, all of our negatives in Cleveland are amplified, and all of our positives are dismissed or swept under the rug. And I want people to know about the No New Jail campaign. You can find out about it through the Cuyahoga County Jail Coalition, at Jail Coalition, on all social media platforms. The Jail Coalition helped to stop the purchase of this toxic waste site at Transport Road here in Cleveland, where the county government, and especially Armin Budish, who in a couple of weeks will no longer be county executive, and yet he tried to have this $750 million jail built here in Cleveland because they did not have the funding for this all up front. They were going to sell bonds. And in order to finance these bonds, the Cuyahoga County government intended to extend a sales tax for 40 years. So essentially, the poor people of Cleveland would be made to pay for their own jail, which would be set up to warehouse poor people in Cuyahoga County. And because this is Cleveland, because we are the mistake on the lake, this does not get talked about, and our wins are not told in the national discourse. So I want people to know, thank you very much. Please follow the No New Jail campaign at Jail Coalition on all social media sites. Thank you. Oh, and I also want to second, do go talk to the students in the second row, because the Abolitionist Project is fantastic and they're doing great work.
I didn't mean to be the last one up here, but I'm happy to be. Thank you so much for talking to. I really appreciate it. My name is Cass. I have another announcement as well. I'm with a group called Surge. My friend Jennifer was here as well. We are showing up for racial justice, the chapter of Northeast Ohio. I just want to plug for that. I'm going to read from our website. In 2022, we are working to a non-police care response where mental health workers respond to certain crisis calls instead of police, because healthcare problems deserve healthcare solutions. You can find us at surgeneo.org, surjneo.org. And we have like member meetings coming up. You can see them there. Thank you so much.
Still here, you are comrades indeed. Thank you for being with us, Derecka. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Thank you, for Kamaria, for being in conversation with our esteemed guests. Thank you all for your energy. We'll see you back here on Friday and Saturday. Oh, the book signing. There are books out for purchasing. The thank you. And Derecka will sign books. Thank you. Oh, yes.